Recorded live at the April GTDC Summit EMEA, this episode of Beyond Distribution features GTDC CEO Frank Vitagliano in conversation with top leaders from the European distribution community. They explore the shift from traditional hardware and software models to cloud and subscription-based businesses and the platform investments needed to support a rapidly evolving IT ecosystem. The discussion also tackles why adaptability is now essential, what digital readiness looks like for vendors, and how AI, especially in cybersecurity, is reshaping the channel. This episode features insights from our panelists: Nick Bannister, President of ECS EMEA for Aero; Miriam Murphy, President of Europe for TD Synnex; Jesper Troll, CEO of Exclusive Networks; and Matthew Sanderson, EVP and President EMEA for Ingram Micro. This episode offers sharp perspectives on the forces driving change across the industry. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and don't forget to hit that button and subscribe so you don't miss a single one. Thanks for listening.
This is an opportunity for us to just talk about some things that are really important and sort of wrap up, what we've been discussing for certainly this morning, the last, 3-4 hours, but also a lot that's been happening over the last couple of days, in the entire conference. The other thing that's, very significant that you should understand is that these folks on this panel here represent, quick back of the envelope, $130 billion of global revenue, your companies. So these are the leaders of, as I said earlier, some of the biggest and some of the best distributors around. So thank you for joining. So let me start, Nick, with you. Yeah. You're sitting right here next to me, so that kind of works. Looking back over the past year, what do you think have been the most significant shifts within the IT partner ecosystem, and how has it reshaped collaboration and the way people are working and value creation?
Yeah, so from a partner perspective, it's slightly different over the last 12 months because vendors have shifted their thinking from that enterprise area. Now it's very much focused about how we help in the mid-market. What value can we bring to the mid-market? And I'm sure for the other distributors in the room today, it's a topic that's really close to your heart, but it's also a topic that is really good for distributors because a vendor can't access that mid-market without collaboration with a distributor, because we have the relationships, we have the different areas of our business. We can help on marketing, we can help on technical support, we can help on many different aspects. So we've really seen a shift in the last 12 months. Who can we find? Who can we grow to be that next tier one, to be that partner of the future? And I think that's probably the key shift that we've seen, apart from the most obvious, which is that move to cloud. Many partners now are looking to us to help them move into cloud. And have the option of both on-prem, off-prem, not just buy products on cloud, be able to order products through platform, but also have billing all in one area so they can buy multi-vendor products and have billing all in one area. So two key areas really from my side.
Yeah, and I think that's really significant when you start thinking about or talking about sort of the partner of the future. People have to start really thinking about that. And I know the vendor community has to think about it.
Yeah, totally differently.
You guys are all thinking about it. In a lot of cases, it's your customer and your customer of the future, and what are they going to require, from you going forward. And I think that's something that you really have to start thinking about now because it's happening.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Miriam, we've clearly seen a shift to services-led model over the, last years anyway, and it's involving enablement services, technical training, sales plays, and it's also frankly quite complicated, I think, in some cases. And so what are you doing there, and how are you helping the vendor community implement those models and also be able to pass it down through your, to your customers?
Well, it's multifaceted, Frank, because what we've got to remember is it's not just the digitization of the market. It's also about the generational transformation of decision makers. Think about the decision makers in the entire ecosystem are increasingly digital natives. And so the expectation is not just the services, a services-led model. It's also, how much we are embracing and enabling more digitization in the process. So from a capacity perspective, it's certainly increased and changed, not just the type of enablement that we are providing and facilitating, which supports what Nick said around the type of partners and end user that we are being expected to reach, but also the delivery mechanism for how we're doing that and how we are increasing the level of connectivity between our systems, our vendor systems, our partner systems, and into the end user. Because the expectation is not just digitization for transaction purposes, it's also leveraging digitalization to truly nurture the life cycle of an opportunity. So we're no longer seen or required to handle and manage that initial enablement around, training, but we are also expected, and it's where our value truly comes in, when we are in a position to support partners as they enter new technology areas. We've talked a lot about AI. We will talk about the impact that, that has on security, on networking, on all of those areas. But really it's about, how we are nurturing everything. It's not just about landing a sale. It's not about renewing it. It is also about, how we support adoption, expansion for our partners. And when I say partners, I mean the vendor partners and also our customer partners.
Yeah, upscale.
Up and down.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, just further evidence of the evolution and where distribution has come from and where you're going. And it, of course, ties directly back to, when you look at the services-led piece, it ties back to, in many cases, how customers want to buy. So let me switch to some of what you're seeing. So Jesper, where are you seeing the strongest growth signals right now in EMEA? When we look at cloud marketplaces, cybersecurity, AI infrastructure, et cetera, or something else. What are you seeing from a growth standpoint?
Yeah, we really only participate in one of the ones you mentioned, right, which is cybersecurity. So, I think this is a topic that continues to be on every customer's, every government's mind. We talked a lot about AI the last couple of days. AI is driving acceleration in cyber attacks. It's driving acceleration in the threat landscape. Many companies want to give employees opportunities to leverage AI, but their data is not structured properly and secured properly to actually unleash the value you could get from that. So AI is clearly driving growth in the cybersecurity segment that is somehow already growing. Internally, I always tell our teams it's not about if we're going to grow, it's about where we're going to grow, because the market is growing in this space. And so for us, it's very much around growing, for our vendors, driving net new accounts, driving the expansion of our partner base, and cross and upsell the ones that have platforms to offer.
Yeah. I mean, you can't have a discussion about what's going on in the world today, and certainly in the technology markets, without cybersecurity becoming such a major part of it. It's just it's everywhere. So we talked a little bit about investment earlier. I did, and talked about the massive investments, Matthew, that all companies, all the distributors are making, in your business and in the transformation. But clearly in your case, you're managing a very broad portfolio And so you've got to balance your investments between the traditional, volume business, which is, a significant part of the business, as well as the higher value practices like security, cloud, AI, data intelligence. How are you finding that? What are you thinking about as you're doing that?
Yeah, I think in the past, is my microphone working okay? Yeah, I think in the past, I think it was, over the last few years, it was how much investment is going into those higher margin areas. That's changed for us, and I'm sure for everyone else, in the sense of the large investment going into the platform, the digitization of our businesses, which covers all product areas. So no longer is it just that focus on that high margin at the moment. Get that platform business running smoothly, efficiently, for the volume business to make sure those transactions are running frictionlessly, and far more efficient than they are today. So platform covers all areas. Along with that comes a big investment in people. The change management required in our business, and I'm sure in other businesses throughout the channel, when you talk about particularly the go-to-market teams, how we can change the way that our sellers are working today, the new skills they've got to work. So there's a large amount of investment that's ongoing now in terms of change management at all levels of the business. So we're really seeing that. Equally as well, again, across all categories, we see a lot of investment continue to go around life cycle, refurbishment. That's very important. And then if you move back into the higher margin areas, services, professional services, pre-sales, post-sales, managed services. I think there's sort of life cycle over a period of time. And at the moment within distribution, there's a lot of partners, vendors looking to take a lot from what distribution can offer, particularly around the lower end services, pre and post. So there's that skill, that investment, bringing experience in, again, investing into the automated systems around that is very important. And then finally, around AI, we will talk around AI, the enablement, the investment that we're putting into training, partner enablement, but also, again, internally, training our staff. Sven spoke about it, the people internally there, so they can go out, they can sell it competently, and they can add value to their partners. So it's not just one area anymore.
All in an environment that's really easy to navigate. And I say that sarcastically, based on all the discussions we've had today about the complexity of the world that we're living in, and all of the potential issues that we see. It makes it a little tough.
But I think with that, when you talk around the speed of the transaction, the proactiveness of distribution now, that's required to be there, again, takes a lot of investment, just doesn't come overnight.
Yeah.
And I think, the majority of people in this room would have been investing in those areas over the last few years.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question. And I would also argue the majority of the people in this room recognize what distribution's done over the, past, continually, but certainly over the past 4 or 5 years, you've seen just, this with everything that's been happening and the investments that have to be made and the transition to platforms, et cetera. It's just a very, very interesting times.
I think the pace of transformation, and I'm sure all the others would agree, is just incredible. I've been in distribution a long, long time, and I know we always say it operates at such a fast pace, but I've never seen anything like it is at the moment.
I would ask the other panelists what they think about that. Right? Yeah. I know in my time, in the industry, I've never been in a period where there's just so much happening. And it's not just the global economic kind of stuff. It's within just the world that we live. Cool. Yeah. Jesper, obviously going back to the cybersecurity piece, and how it relates to AI, let's dig in a little bit and talk a little bit about how is that changing for you and your partners, and what's the most important thing you're doing to help partners monetize AI beyond just hardware and application purchases?
Yeah, we spend a lot of time educating the channel, the partners we have, on the need for embracing AI. The pace, as we talk about, is just it is really significant. It does a couple of things. It's first of all, it changes what we are selling. There's a lot of focus on identity. Everyone thinks that hackers are breaking into IT, but actually they log in. So identity becomes sort of the new battleground. We see that playing out on the vendor space where there's a lot of consolidation happening. So identity is one area. Sort of maturing our partners and having this conversation with their end customers around the need for adequately protecting the different threat vectors that AI is bringing with it is something we spend a lot of time on. So
yeah, no, it's important. Nick, what are you hearing from your vendor partners about their go-to-market priorities, particularly here in EMEA?
But I was sitting there in the audience today and I was thinking, I've got this question. You guys have heard nothing but AI this morning. We're in our blackout period, so I can only talk to you about so much stuff. And I'm thinking, what do I say different to you guys? So I'll give you my view from that perspective and where I think distribution plays, and then I'll end on a story that just might bring a smile to your face. So from a distribution point and a vendor point, obviously, every vendor's focus is now AI. It has to. So where does that leave distribution? What's our role to play in the middle of that? And as Jesper rightly said, in that comes opportunity for us. You have, with AI, lots of moving data, so there's a huge security risk. We have to take all these vendor offerings, which are individualized, and as a distributor, we have to build that solution, but then we have to wrap security around it. We have to think of the right approach, a bit of consultative approach. How do we wrap, our consultants into that to help partners? How do we create that go-to-market for our partners? So I think, there's many, many questions that all of us on stage are asking ourselves at the moment and working through that. So, probably one of the biggest questions everybody in this room constantly asks is this hype? Am I investing too soon? Am I investing too late? Where's AI really going to go? Is it as big as we all think? So let me tell you a story about Colin, the taxi driver. And it's a true story, this is. My local taxi driver, who's 75 years old, is Colin. And I jumped in his cab the other week. And I was off on a business trip. He said, Nick, I need a favour. He said, you're into that IT thing. I said, I certainly am, Colin. And at this point, I'm thinking, please, God, don't ask me to fix your laptop. I'm the least technical person in the world. But he said, what device can I buy off Amazon that's an AI device that will help me get better on my for horse racing? I'm like, Colin, the taxi driver, he's now considering an AI device. Obviously, I charged him £2,000 consultancy. But I guess the moral of that story is, if he's prepared to invest his hard-earned money thinking about how AI can help him, then we should all be doing exactly the same.
Yes,
that's my view.
No, that's a pretty good story. I actually have a lot of friends that have asked the same question.
Yeah,
at racetrack. That's great. Miriam, I talked a lot about platforms, obviously, and it's happened. It's continuing to play out. Obviously, the capabilities will get better over time. But what capabilities do you think the vendors and the solution provider partners expect from the distributor platforms? And as importantly, how do you see that evolving, over the next couple of years as the implementation continues and the value continues to grow?
Well, first, I think Colin might need a different kind of consulting, and that sounds. If he thinks he's going to make a quick win on the horses, using AI. So look, Frank, all of us here have invested heavily in our platform capabilities, and you used the term earlier this morning of ecosystem orchestration, which, we have all talked about that. All of our companies have invested heavily, and certainly, we are in a unique position in the ecosystem to be able to reach not just, large, but small enterprises and to build from that. Also, the transition from, a hardware dominated to software defined to now increasingly different consumption models be they through cloud platforms or subscription models. All of those transitions have meant that we've had to embrace and engage and position ourselves in the middle of all of those types of transactions. And that is what is expected of us. It's expected that we not only are able to position ourselves and our platforms to support transactions, to support this, nurturing of the life cycle of a sale that I talked about earlier, but also that we are able to connect what has now become much more complex in terms of the number of players that are entering the market. If I reflect on the number of reseller partners that TD SYNNEX is operating with in Europe, the type of partner has changed fundamentally over the last 5-6 years in terms of their importance and their relevance. Some of the partners who are now heavily involved in influence in the AI era were not companies that we were even, aware of or were, even considered as IT decision makers in, 5 years ago. Right. They are, consultancies. They are companies that were in a purely intelligence environment rather than transaction. Now they are influencing, and they are very much in the decision-making loop. So part of our role and the evolution of all of our marketplaces has got to be to also position, engage those type of partners in our transaction flow. Bring partners together. We see an increasingly number of situations where, end users are engaging 3 or 4 partners in a single solution because they need different expertise. We are in a unique position, and our marketplaces need to be able to support a 3 or 4 partner engagement on a single project. And also, it's not just about the product, it's about the incremental services offering. Mm-hmm. So as we look at what we're adding to our platforms, we're adding, connectivity to service offerings, which means we're opening up the platforms to some of the people we were traditionally only treating as customers to also be able to support from a vendor perspective in the services offerings. So it's become really multidimensional, and the flow of the transaction has become much more interesting, and 360-degree relationships are something that are now very much part of our environment, and the platforms that we have all been building that's what's needed of those.
To enable that, support that. Yeah, it is so much more complex. When you look at the map, and there's been a number of different variations from consultants that have built the slide, but essentially the distributors in the middle orchestrating that, right? But if you start looking at all of the different iterations of whether it's an MSP, an MSSP, an influencer, just any, and then you have the traditional solution provider who tends to call themselves any other thing, it tends to be pretty complicated.
And if you think about the, even just from the complexity from a financing perspective.
Oh, sure.
It used to be just a question of credit line. That was, historically a big part of our role. Now, you're looking at transactions that are, 3, 5, 7 years in terms of the commitment and how you manage that, how you build a construct that supports those when, who knows which companies are going to be players in 5 and 7 years' time in the process.
Yeah, it's certainly added a little bit of stress. We had this discussion yesterday in the finance forum with the CFOs from many of your organizations and a lot of the vendors and some finance folks from the vendor organizations who were in there. And we had to have the discussion about, the different delivery models and consumption models and and some of the now requirements that the new distributors have to figure out how to support those models, and it's complicated. And one of the things that we observed was that almost everyone is different. Every large vendor, there's many of them in this room, as you've negotiated, it's probably the right term, how to support that. They tend to be different. I think the good news for some of the smaller vendors in the room, though, is once you kind of develop a model that kind of seems to work, then you can deploy it, across, and it works and it makes sense. But it's taken there's been a little bit of pain associated with figuring out how to support those models. Nick, you're shaking your head. I know, Matthew, you are too. And, I've talked to a lot of you folks over the last couple of years over this. Yeah, it's a challenge. It really is. Matthew, we've had, for the last 2-3 years, ongoing discussions about hyperscalers and the role of hyperscalers in the marketplace. And, are they competitors? Are they cooperating with us? What are we doing? What's the, and then the disintermediation question always comes up, which has for years with distribution, which is laughable at this point, but that's another conversation. But what are your thoughts regarding how they fit into your EMEA channel strategy, and how's that evolving for you?
Yeah, I mean, that debate's been going on for a while. Yes. We've all had it. And is it an opportunity? Is it a threat? I mean, we, as I'm sure the others do, we see it as an opportunity, and it's becoming an increasingly bigger part of the go-to-market, particularly around our cloud business. And very important as well, we're strategic partners with all the hyperscalers, so it's a very important relationship. They're driving the market technology forward, so it's crucial. But for us, as I'm sure it's the same with others, we've got dedicated resource now working on that. With the advent of private offerings that we can bring together, the ISVs, the partners, we can add value, and distribution does add value. At the end of the day, the hyperscalers are very strong in the enterprise space, but in terms of scale, I think you spoke about it this morning, or somebody mentioned it. That's crucial that we can bring that scale to the offering. So it's important, and so many times now that end users, they're coming, they don't just want to buy one product, they're buying multiple products. We can bring those solutions together, we can help, we can do the advisory piece around that, and equally can wrap services around it as well. That's very important at the end of the day, that adds value all the way through the chain. So increasingly important for us, do we have it as a focus? Absolutely.
Yeah, and I just think it's further evidence of flexibility and adaptability that your organizations have all been able to put in place to ensure that, IT supply chain keeps flowing, right? And that to me is critical, right? I'm going to ask you all the same question. We've got a few minutes left, and really it's just a quick question, and it's what would be the one thing? So we've got a lot of suppliers in the room. And they're here, and they value your opinion, they value the collaboration. But I'd ask each of you, what would be the one thing that you would ask of them, right? In terms of, what would you like? How would you like them to be thinking about, what you're doing? What would the one ask be that you would have? Nick, I'll start with you.
I guess from a vendor point of view, distribution is that critical element. Profitable growth is just as important to us as it is to a reseller, as it is to a vendor. So, keep that front of mind. Would be my ads.
And don't get enamored with the $125 billion that I talked about earlier.
Correct. Yeah. Everyone at the bills tonight.
That's a good point. Good. Miriam?
Well, I'm pretty sure I probably said the same thing when I was in the panel a couple of years ago. But one of the challenges of distribution is that we've always had to evolve, and we've always had to adapt to whatever change. So to reference to Matt's answer on the hyperscalers, if you don't transform and you don't change, then every new entrant and change in the market becomes not an opportunity but a threat.
Yep.
And so my ask to the vendor community here is always don't just assume that our capabilities and the role that we play is the same as the role that we played last year or the year before, because this constant evolution is something that is in our DNA, because it has had to be in our DNA. I regularly say, the most frustrating thing, the only frustrating thing about being in distribution is that everybody always has a preconceived idea of what a distributor in this ecosystem should do. And frankly, if we just stuck to what people thought that we could do, we would not be representing the scale of the market that we do today, and we would not be in the markets that we're in today.
Yeah.
So, always keep an open mind. Consider us as the partner to also enable your reach and growth, and look at what are your biggest challenges and look to us to solve them.
Yeah. And the worst question you can get is, or the worst comment you can get is, gee, I didn't know you did that. So I get that. I think that's a really important point. Yes, sir?
I only have 7 minutes and 45 seconds left.
Oh, he said it. That when he asks, huh?
No, I think a couple of things. So just building on hyperscalers, I actually think the value of the transactional element of a distributor is diminishing. I think the value is moving to sort of the pre and the post side. And so my ask of vendors is to continuously think about how to evolve programs to actually remunerate for the value where it's generated, as opposed to keep paying on the transaction, which, at the end of the day, doesn't necessarily take into account the, how much profit pool you created around the transaction. Then I always said, I said it for the last 30 years, predictability trumps profitability. I think for distributors, we are big businesses. It's a bit like a super tanker to move it around. And so having line of sight to how we are earning money, and where the profit pool are in the work we do with our vendors is almost more important than whether we are earning 10 or 12 or 8 or 7%, because it takes time to adjust. And, the road is long with vendor programs that pay you today for where you need to be in 3 years, and we can't move like that. And unfortunately, I think ultimately it hits the entire ecosystem because we can't invest around it.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So, and the last point is, we all work with different vendors. We work with some of the same vendors. I would love to see more bespoke programs between a distributor and a vendor. That doesn't need to be, but if I do it with you, I also need to do it with these 5 other distributors, because it's sort of eroding. I mean, I actually think hyperscalers is the one area where we all address it differently. And so there is truly sort of a very different go-to-market motion, whether it's very platform-driven, AI-driven, or other things. But I would love to see more of that in the traditional business, where you recognize that, this distributor is good for this piece, and so we double down with them, another one over here, as opposed to treating everyone the same.
Yeah, as I think about it, a lot of the vendors I talk to are constantly redoing, rewriting, re-architecting their partner programs. But you bring up a really good point, which is, are they thinking about re-architecting the distributor programs, right? And we talked a little bit about that yesterday in the finance forum, and we talked about, how to develop programs and make them, less complex and more compelling, based with an outcomes, based approach to it. And
we see it, I think, on the downstream partner side, you see more and more differentiation, right? You have specialization programs, you have other types of programs that gives extra incentives they come out on the left pocket, but they go into the right pocket. Right. But it's the right thinking, but it's still to be seen on distribution, which is still paid on the transaction.
Yeah, moving it away from the box. Yeah.
I'll just finish off, just going back to the digital side. What we're asking is for the vendor community to be, digitally ready to be to keep up with the transformational change that's going through distribution. I think if you look across the piece, you've got a number of partners that are probably far more advanced than others, and we need everybody to be there. We're transforming across all of our businesses at such a rapid pace. Trying to improve the customer experience, trying to improve the efficiency, the end-to-end, from the ordering to the quote to the ordering. and that needs investment, both from a dollar perspective, right? Everybody's investing, but also from a human perspective, a time perspective. So that's one thing that I ask, that people are, keeping up with that transformational change from a digital.
That's great. Well, look, thank you for certainly your time and certainly your attendance here. And I think everybody certainly appreciates what you all are doing to continue product flow from an IT services and product standpoint and solution. So thanks for your time. I appreciate it. And this was a great panel.